Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Younes Jalali, and this is a little bit of a conceptual talk. Basically, there is a lot of focus on the concept of uncertainty in our lives. In fact, there's a very famous statement you may have heard about. The only thing uncertain in life is death and taxes. Right? That's something that Ben Franklin said a couple of hundred years ago. And ever since, this idea of uncertainty has kind of gained momentum. So that was in the late 1700s, after the American independence and the ratification of the Constitution. You would have thought that he would be very exuberant and optimistic, but it was far from the case. Yeah? 1800s there were conflicts in the world and so on, but nothing major. Europeans went after each other and so on. But the 1900s, the 20th century, was really catastrophic. We had World War I and World War II. And you really start seeing a correlation between the obsession with uncertainty, the fact that we don't know what the future holds for us, and everything is kind of very elusive, very ambiguous, very threatening. People talk about anxiety, the age of anxiety, right? Why? Because things are unknown or uncertain. And in fact, this has sort of infiltrated all spheres of our intellectual life, if you like. So even in science, we're obsessed with uncertainty, right? The famous saying is that away from a measurement, there's only uncertainty, right? In physics, we talk about the uncertainty principle. I can know where a particle is, but I don't know how fast it's moving. Or I may know how fast it's moving, but I don't know where it is. Okay, things like that. And while all of that is true, because it is science at the end of the day, but it starts to mask the other aspect of our knowledge, which is about the things that we're quite certain about. And it's by sort of forgetting to think about those and reflect about those things and just sort of being obsessed with uncertainty that actually we miss a lot of things. We miss a lot of things that are actually fundamental to our existence. So really the thrust of the gist of this talk is to say that, okay, we need to change gear, shift in paradigm, if you like. Yes, uncertainty exists, but more important than uncertainty are the certainties. And in fact, if we care about the existence of our species, the continuation of the human race, or just our own well-being, we'd be a lot better off focusing on the certainties and not the uncertainties. Yeah? Okay, since there's a big talk, I'm just going to focus on three things. I think that's sufficient to prove the point. So the first is that fundamentally, if we think that we want the continuation of the human race, okay, the first certainty is that we cannot hang out here forever. Okay, by here I mean the planet Earth. In fact, any planet in our solar system, okay, because all life depends on the sun, and the sun is a dying star, unfortunately. It's done half of its life, right? And so really, pretty much it's getting into the second half time. Right, and that's just the fact, right? So if we want to sort of put some numbers to it, if we can collapse sort of the history of the knowable universe or the observable universe to, let's say, 24 hours, so that's when the Big Bang happened, 24 hours ago, right? Now that's when we had all these elementary particles, the building blocks of the atoms, the formation of the atoms, the molecules, the swirling of the gases, the formation of the galaxies, the stars, the planets, the moons, etc. Yeah? And essentially, 8 hours ago is when our sun was formed. Okay? And very shortly after, the planets around the sun were just sort of fragments that kind of spun off of that, if you like, right? And then, of course, we have planet Earth, which is our habitat. And eventually the atmosphere started changing, and we had the oceans, and we start having sort of the primitive forms of life, right? And that happened about 6 hours ago. So these are microorganisms that have left their traces in ancient rock formations, yeah? And then through a very, very, very long evolutionary process, okay, eventually we have terrestrial life, right? And eventually we have the emergence of primates, okay? And primates came about only 6 minutes ago. And then, of course, through a very, very long primates, we have the apes. And then, of course, we have the emergence of humanoids and then the human beings, right? And that happened roughly, 20 seconds ago. So Lucy, which is sort of our big sister, if you like, about 3 million years old, okay? So that came only 20 seconds ago. And then everything since then is just the last 20 seconds, you know, the sort of the Paleolithic, and then, you know, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, the ancient civilizations, all of that, you know, medieval times and so on to modern times, yeah? And of course, looking into the future, the sun is going to run out, okay, of fuel in only 8 hours. Okay, so it came about 8 hours ago, and it will disappear in 8 hours. In fact, it's going to disappear in a very violent way. It's going to expand, become a red giant. It's going to gobble up all of its children, including us, okay, and then it's going to collapse into something very, very, very small, but still hot, and then eventually something very, very small and very cold, just like dust, cosmic dust, right? So if we think about life, kind of big picture, okay, we cannot hang around here forever. That's a certainty. Okay. All right. Now the second certainty is that as of now, we have no clue as to how to get out of here, how to get out of our neighborhood. Okay. And though people are working on, you know, space exploration and things like that, we're very, 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 very far from even sort of having inklings of how we might ever be able to escape into another region of the space where there's another star like our own that's going to last longer, around which there are planets, or at least a planet which is habitable, where we could go there. Okay. So just shuffling around within our solar system is not going to do the trick, because the sun is going to die. Okay. So if we take all the data that's available today, the best we can hope for is that it will take us about 68,000 years, possibly, if we're very lucky, 68,000 years to figure out how to get out of our neighborhood and go somewhere else where we could potentially have the possibility of life and continuation of life. Okay. So how does that come about? Very simple. We sent basically humans to Moon. That was in the 1960s. Yeah, it was 1969. Took a little over 4 days to get there, right? But that is a very, very, very short trip, if you like, in a sort of in a cosmic scale. In fact, if we could travel with the speed of light, it would take only 1 second to get there. From here to the Moon, it would take only 1 second to get there. Maybe a bit more, 1.2, 1.3. Now today, the scientists, NASA, many countries are working on sending human beings to Mars, okay? And they expect that under the most optimistic scenario, we'll be able to do that in 10 years. But more realistically, it's more like 15 years, possibly 2040, something like that, okay? And now, if you compare going to the Moon compared to going to Mars, okay, Mars is 6 minutes away, if we could travel with the speed of light. So it's definitely a much, much longer journey than the 1 second journey we did back in the 60s, right? But remember, it would have taken us 70 years to figure out how to jump, how to go from a 1 second trip to a 6 minute trip. Now, how far do we have to go if we want to have a habitat where human life can continue? Well, the closest star to us is Proximia, as the name implies, right? The problem with Proximia is that it's going to die before our own sun. Okay, so there's really no point in going there. Might as well stay there, right? But there is Alpha Centauri b, okay, which is going to outlast the sun by a large margin, right? But Alpha Centauri b is over 4 light years away, right? So we're going to have to go from something, let's imagine we make it to Mars, human mission, a 6 minute trip. We have to figure out how to do a 4-year-long trip, okay? So if we can sort of continue our progress at the rate of every 70 years, we're going to be able to make sort of a quantum leap in our technological sophistication, abilities, and so on. It's going to take 68,000 years to figure out how to get there. And the trip could take as long as 200,000 years. If we could travel with the speed of light, obviously we'll be there in 4 years, but we can't travel with the speed of light. So it'll be anywhere from 4 years to 200,000 years, if you take your pick, right? So essentially, you start to put things together. You say, okay, so our sun is dying, that's a certainty. And as of now, it's a certainty that we don't know how to get out. And if we want to have a fighting chance to get out of here, we probably need about 68,000 years. Yeah? Of course, we don't even know if Alpha Centauri B has a planet. About 10 years ago, scientists were very optimistic, said, oh, we've spotted a planet. But it turned out to be just a false alarm, unfortunately. So as of now, there are no planets revolving around Alpha Centauri B, which is the star that outlasts the sun. So it could potentially be our next habitat, if you like. Okay? So that's sort of what it is. So we start thinking about these things, say, okay, as a minimum, we have to be so well behaved globally as the human race so that we don't disappear before 68,000 years. Because if we do, then it's game over. We're gone, right? All right. So now let's see, not thinking about the next 68,000 years, but thinking about the next 68 years, or let's say to the end of the 21st century, 2100, which is the life expectancy of, our teens and, the middle school, high school kids we have here, yeah? So here's the third certainty, which is quite worrisome. And the certainty is that we absolutely, definitely, positively have the capability of exterminating the human race. And we've had that capability for about 70 years. Okay, so here I'm talking about atomic bombs. Yeah? And in fact, when you look at the data on our nuclear, I'm not talking about civilian nuclear, I'm not talking about power plants and things of that nature, I'm talking about military application of nuclear technology. It's a harrowing, it's a kind of a very scary picture. Okay. So as of now, there's about 13,000 warheads, okay, nuclear warheads, each of which has a capability, or explosive capability of 1 megaton. So to put that in perspective, that's 70 times more lethal than what exploded over Hiroshima. Yeah? So Hiroshima, by comparison, would just be, today they would call it a tactical nuclear weapon. You hear that term nowadays in the news, yeah? So you can blow up very easily, wipe out 7 million people with one of those nuclear warheads. Yeah? And in fact, there's some very precise data on this. It's confined to an area of 80 square miles. So if someone were crazy enough to want to blow up Dhaka is 120 square miles. So you need 2 of those. Or you can take one of those megaton loads and break it up into 825 kilotons. And all of this technology exists. And you make sure that the thing blasts before it hits the ground, because that's where it does the most damage. So that was sort of the lesson, if you like, from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Yeah? So all this destructive technology, sophisticated technology exists. Yeah? So if with one of those warheads we can wipe out 7 million people, with 13,000 of them, we do the math, we can wipe out 90 billion people. But how many people do we have on planet Earth? Only 8 billion people. And even if we look at to the end of the century when the world population is supposed to peak, estimates are that we're going to have 11 billion people. So as of today, and I'm not even talking about hydrogen bombs, they're even more lethal. Okay, I'm talking about normal nuclear bombs, the ones that are based on the disintegration of fissile material, not fusion. Yeah? We can wipe out the human race many, many times over. Yeah. What's even more concerning is that since the inception of this stuff, back in 1945, okay, so we're talking about close to 80 years, there have been more than 30 near misses, and in fact even accidents, nuclear bomb accidents. So near miss is very easy. The Russians misread the Americans misread the Russians, somebody misreads both, whatever, and they want to push the button, they don't, okay? But there's even been accidents. Let's say a B-52 bomber that collides with a fueling, plane, and then, the bombs drop. One goes into the Mediterranean, another one goes into a fishing village, and then they go eventually retrieve. There are many, many, many examples like that. Which means that if you look at from now till year 2100, your life expectancy, you can expect to have another 30 some odd accidents like that. if the past is any indication of the future. If there is no intent to use this stuff, okay, that's under sort of still an optimistic scenario. So really, it is relatively a dire picture. Okay. So these are really the three certainties. So now, what do we conclude from that? Well, this is sort of the million-dollar question. What is to be done, right? That's really the only question that matters, okay? And actually, this is the title of a book that Lenin wrote, like over 100 years ago when he was preparing his Bolshevik revolution and how to re-engineer society and create a brave new world, right? Of course, it ended as a catastrophe, right? But the question is still relevant, right? And we all need to kind of ask ourselves that. Especially the younger generation, as you're dreaming about your future, things you want to do, so things to keep in the back of your minds. You know? Of course, we can do nothing, but if we do nothing, then, okay, fine. One generation, another generation, another generation, 68,000 years, you know, things can go wrong. I mean, just only in the last 70, 75 years, many things, we've had many near misses, yeah? So that would be gambling with life, right? Alternatively, we can all sort of focus on the existential threats as we lead our normal lives, the existential threats to human life. And number one is all of this nuclear arsenal that's lying around everywhere. See, out of these 13,000 warheads, 3,000 of them are actually already deployed. That means all it needs is just a pushing of a button, so to speak. No? So nuclear disarmament, or nuclear armament rather, is an existential threat. We cannot ignore it, okay? But it's not the only one. Today we talk a lot about sort of the environmental degradation, global warming, and how it's sort of everything's spinning out of control, the melting of the polar ice cap, you know, all the things that sort of follow from that, right? That is more like a gradual death, right? That's also concerning. But this other stuff, the nuclear stuff, is just sudden death, Armageddon. You know, there's no other word for it. Yeah. So, besides nuclear armament, environmental degradation, that's really the second big threat. Now, we may or may not know what was the temperature of the globe baseline during the Industrial Revolution when Benjamin Franklin made his famous statement, right? But we definitely know what's been happening over the last 100 years. We definitely know what's been happening over the last 50 years. Since the 1970s, the globe has warmed by 1 degree centigrade. That is definite. There's no dispute. Okay. And if it continues at this pace to the end of the century, we have another 1.5 degrees on top of that. And you can see just what kind of havoc that causes. Okay. So that's a second existential threat we need to sort of think about, right? And then there's other things, right, which kind of compounds the picture. We have global inequity. We have sort of the North, if you like, and the West. It's very affluent, very sophisticated, very technologically advanced, etc. We have the global South. You know, we have Latin America, we have Africa, we have South Asia, etc. And the East as well. That lags far, far, far behind. And since everything has become sort of interconnected with communication, it's sort of a global village, we cannot just sort of create an island of happiness and prosperity somewhere and hope that nothing else, you know, these other things won't affect us. They will affect us. They are affecting us. You just need to watch the news every day. You'll see the interconnections, yeah? And then the fourth thing that really is also a cause for concern is a little bit, okay, social injustice, right? Within societies, even the wealthiest societies, the sort of discrimination we see based on race or gender or social class or what have you, or intersectionality of all of those things. That is almost like when a society is at war with itself. And societies that are at war with themselves often go to war with other societies because that's the only way they know how to extricate themselves from the situation. And when you have all of these dangerous toys around, the consequences can be catastrophic, right? So with that sort of uplifting thought, I end my talk, and just the only thing I would say is that the next time you hear about uncertainty, fine, that's fine. But don't forget, what matters is thinking about the certainties. Thank you.